Hello, host Eric here, host of Talking with Famous People, and today I'd like to talk about dictating the narrative, a life strategy derived and maximized through typology of the Myers-Briggs type. This approach is going to work best for NTs probably, or at least for people who have an N, either an N Dom or a TI Dom, either N or a TI Dom, or somebody who has perhaps a TEN something combination. So it's not necessarily only for T's. There are plenty of very smart Fs out there for whom this might even be more effective than it would be for somebody who's less emotive. So what I'm going to be talking about is dictating the narrative, which means in your life you are going to encounter lots of opportunities and or risky moments, and there are pivoting narratives surrounding you at all times, by which I mean as you're dealing with the other agents or people in your life, they're coming at you with a whole set of assumptions, a whole set of perspectives, their own cognitive stack, plus their own experience narratives, which is to say, the things that have, the events of their life form the grain of sand around which forms the uh, the narrative that is an expression of, and in a lot of ways is the substance of, a cognitive function. So, for example, when you are at work, how you're going to view the hierarchy at work, how you're going to view your own role in the workplace, and how you're going to view your own achievement of success and what it means and what you're trying to do and what you value and all that sort of stuff is something that is reflective of the cognitive stack function, and additionally is something that you can you can change, but you have to change it by converting things into the same currency. So what I mean by that is, if I come at a feeler with a bunch of logic about why their feelings are wrong, which is the sort of thing that we rationalists tend to do. I know I've done that plenty of times. It took me a long time to realize that you really ought not do that. I used to basically, when my wife and I would argue, a lot of times she'd be expressing blame towards me for her feelings and saying, you are a bad person because I feel bad because I expect this from you and you're not meeting that expectation. So I didn't understand really what the core problem there was, right? I kept looking at it as though, okay, well, this expectation, is it reasonable or not? Let's talk about that. And then if it is reasonable, then it's my bad for not meeting it. And then let's try to organize some sort of structured solution to this whereby I can meet that need uh, with the minimum amount of imposition on me. And then let's also evaluate whether or not your feeling bad is justified. So, should you feel lonely? Should you feel should you feel is one of my favorite questions, right? Well, the answer is it doesn't matter if they should feel that way. They're going to feel that way. So, if you are trying to manage how other people feel, the only way to do that is to behave in a relationship with how they with what they want, you know? So are you going to meet are you going to do things make them happy, or are you going to not do those things? Hopefully you're not doing things that actively upset them on purpose. But a lot of times we do that. We push buttons and stuff when we are in a relationship that's gotten some bad habits. And I know that my last marriage was nothing but bad habits by the end. So, or almost nothing but. Anyway, sorry for the yawning. Probably makes you yawn, huh? The point is this: dictating the narrative means giving the people around you a narrative that works with their currency. So you're going to have to take a given narrative and position it in a number of different ways. For example, if I wanted to convince people who aren't my audience, so to speak, people who aren't naturally going to be interested in what I'm talking about. And there are plenty of people in the world who don't like abstraction. They don't particularly find idea talk relevant or interesting to anything. Interesting or relevant to anything. Because to them, it is the exact opposite of the point. The point of life is to immerse oneself in experiencing the moment, to be mindful, to be aware of one's environment, to be aware of one's body, that sort of stuff. To me, I've got SI, I'm aware of myself as an agent in time, but I don't have SE in my conscious stack. I don't fundamentally think of my body as being relevant or meaningful to anything in particular. It's this thing that carries me around. You know, if it's not working properly, it bugs the shit out of me, but if it is working properly, then I don't even think about it. Why would one? That's not interesting. To me, right? Because my cognitive stack puts me not concerned about that. So you have to remember when you're going into a work environment. Let's say you're dealing with somebody who makes statements that indicate to you that they're concerned about their body, like, oh, I'm exercising a lot and I'm eating healthy, and like, you know, they say stuff like that. They're living out their own narratives about what's important, right? Now, when I was younger, I would just be like, you know, that stuff's all bullshit, right? I don't do that anymore because it has a lot to do with understanding types and typology, which is these individuals are living out values that are distinct from mine and in fact are foreign to me in some level. I can kind of get the sense of I like the experience of my body in a number of contexts. But it's just as I like the experience of my feelings in a number of contexts. That internal feeling is not in my stack either. It's in my seventh slot. So as a consequence, I'm going to experience feelings uh, in a not very permanent way. And I'm not going to see them as things that persist. Unless I am unable to stop thinking about the thing that's making me unhappy, which is usually going to happen only when an irrational feels as though some great injustice has been done. So if you get left in a relationship, let's say you get dumped, and you're irrational, you're going to be very sad if you feel as though some injustice was done, that if the person didn't fulfill their duty to you or they betrayed you, then that's going to impact you significantly. Because then you've got something that's shaking you foundationally in your internal feelings area where your thinking can't get around it. There's no rendering it into useful meaning right away. The only useful meaning comes from the suffering itself, and then that's somewhat removed. So, I mean, as rationals, what we want to do is we want to render our experiences into useful meaning. If you get dumped after a long stretch of trying to work it out, you still kind of want to hang on to the relationship, but there's lots of stuff where you've said, well, these are my boundaries, and she said, well, they're my boundaries, and then the relationship doesn't end up lasting, and she leaves. Well, that's an entirely different matter. You've had your chance to say your piece, and she's had her chance to say her piece. And you know, even if it is the case, and I'm not necessarily sure it is, But even if it is the case that when she left me, I wanted her to stay, even if that is the case, um, it was very difficult for me. There's always going to be in the end of a relationship points of justice that both sides can hang on to. But it makes a big difference whether the justice is hard to ignore, the injustice is hard to ignore or hard to find. So it makes a huge difference. And and then your thinking can render and render and render away, and you'll discover, oh, okay, this relationship has ended in a way that has not left me distraught. So when you are going into the workplace or the world in general, and you are dealing with other people, you need to understand how their cognitive processes work in order to accomplish what you want them to accomplish. If you feel as though there's some truth they need to understand, then you need to make it as high profit for them in their currency as possible. Which means if I am talking to an ISFP and I'm asking the ISFP to do something, I'm going to talk to the ISFP about how it's going to make me feel and how it's going to make the ISFP feel. The ISFP is first and foremost concerned with the ISFP's feelings, but the ISFP can relate to other people via expressions of introverted feeling. And you want to try to keep it as present tense as possible with that ISFP. So if you can tell them it's going to make you feel really good right now, then that's going to be a substantially better motivator for them than sometime in the future. They're very present focused. When you are dictating narratives over the course of time, you need to establish clearly two things. One, pivot points upon which you're going to return all of your argumentation on that point. And remember that on some level, all of life is argumentation. I'm going to make another video that's basically that in a little while. Not today, probably, but possibly. Understand that you're going to come back to this. It's a framework. It's a central idea that you refer back to and frame everything through. So if you are trying to argue a position that this plan that the company is going through with here is a bad idea, you have to be very cautious in dictating those narratives, right? My company's going through the bad plan. I don't like it. I don't like what it makes me do, and I don't like what it prioritizes, and I think it's a mistake. I think it's going to lose company money. I really do think that, let's say. And also, I also don't like the additional tasks it gives me. I don't want to do them. So, obviously, you go into dictating a narrative like that, you don't want to focus on what it makes you do at all. You don't want to focus on you at all in that kind of a narrative. You just want to be like, okay, what's my pivot point? That's the question you ask. What's my pivot point? And with a narrative like that, your pivot point should be profitability, because that's the thing that's going to convince most people in a company situation, right? This is going to harm this corporation's or company's profitability. It's going to harm it in the short term. It's going to harm it in the long term. I do not feel as though I can remain silent in the face of so ill-advised a course of action and look myself in the mirror in the morning. You want to play the role of principled warrior, you know? You don't want to talk about your own stuff at all. So, but you don't want to be that explicit about it regardless. You want to establish narratives they're going to hit on everybody else's currencies. So there are certain types of personality types that are paranoid. So you want to establish narratives that appeal to them as well, but commit attributional bias. Don't assign individual culpability. Suggest that you don't understand it and let them figure it out, right? I mean, something is is not right. Something's fishy here. I don't know what the motivation is behind this, but think about it. Somebody's benefiting from this course of action. It's clearly not well, it's not advisable objectively. So I don't know. And then that's it. Then they start thinking. Let their paranoia do what it's going to do. It's going to generate. You see what you've done already when you do something like that. You've appealed to their paranoia figuring out part, such that they're going to just bypass and accept and subsume the assumption, which is that there's something wrong in the first place. See what I'm saying? And if you feel as though this person who's paranoid inclined is particularly in opposition to your position, then you need to parse it down to the smallest little thing that they can potentially agree is a bad idea, and suggest basically that there's somebody's behind that with motivations, because paranoid types, they like to go into that stuff. Who are the paranoid types? I don't know. I need to figure that out. There are a couple people in my life that I've experienced, interacted with. I'd like to know what type they're. I'm not sure. ESTJ maybe. That would make sense. ESTJ probably. So anyway, you set that up like that, but you have to make sure you dictate the narrative on all the vectors. So for the rationals in your sphere, you need to dictate some very rational arguments that are as far from you as possible and as unexpected as possible. You have to give people new stuff to think about. Wherever the obvious place to go is with the narrative, to get from A to B, you want to go from X through a wormhole. Okay? So that means if you're going to say, if it's obvious that one of the harms of this potential plan is an initial outlay of costs, but the expected benefit of a long-term benefit, you don't want to say, oh, well, look at these initial costs are too big. That's the obvious thing to say, right? So you need to establish a narrative that people make are memorable. So you say something like, you co-opt that, right? I love the thinking behind it, which is we're gonna lose some money initially, but it's gonna pay off, right? And here's the mechanism that why this is thinking like this. But unfortunately, I don't think that anybody's accounted for this drag vector here that is going to cause those initial costs to be much larger than expected, and it's going to cause those initial costs to last a lot longer than initial costs ought to last. They're actually not initial at all. They're ongoing, persistent, and growing costs if we factor in this drag vector. So, I'm with everybody on the whole strategy here. This is a great idea in concept, but unfortunately, like that kind of stuff. But the thing is, you want to. It's hard to do with hypotheticals that I don't have any concrete stuff to work with, but you really need to set up what the facts are, quote unquote, in advance of making any arguments. So, pin down everybody on some certain agreements to the extent you can. If you can't, make statements regarding that. Multiple people. Sometimes you gotta repeat yourself. And like for me, I don't ever do this thing intentionally. I am somebody who is doing this thing a lot without really thinking about it. Which is, I think things ought to be as they ought to be. When I disagree with the way things are in the status quo, I'm going to make a big explanation about how things ought to be a lot of times to whomever I speak with. If something's on my mind, it'll come up at some point. So, and then you'll see the narrative changes around you. People start echoing it. People's positions change. It's weird. It's true though. I'll do a better video on this at some point. This is kind of a crappy one, but I might go up. I'll have to watch it and see. Thanks for watching Talking with Famous People.